My sister raised her glass and said, "Clear as daylight. Where's your husband and kids?" "Oh. Right. You don't have any." The laughter that followed wasn't loud. But it cut deep. My parents smiling like it was harmless fun. My fork frozen mid-air. I'd spent years paying their bills, saving their home. And now I was the punchline at their table. "Tell me where you're listening from, and what boundary you wish you'd drawn sooner." I did not cry. I did not argue. I went home and opened the banking app. 2 recurring transfers stared back at me, like open faucets. Parents. Sister. I pressed and held the first one. Confirm, cancel. A soft confirmation blinked. Effective immediately. Then the second. Confirm, cancel. Another clean blink. The room felt colder. My screen lit my hands like winter glass. I added the calendar reminder. 21 days. Not a threat. A boundary with a timer. I whispered it to myself, like a password. 21 days to step out of my name. I sat there in the quiet and watched the numbers settle. No drama. No apology drafted. I was done explaining. I only needed proof of what I chose, and when I chose it, the app gave me that. Timestamps. Reference numbers. Each one, a small spine growing where I had been soft. The funny thing about cruelty is how politely it dresses. At brunch, it wore perfume and pearls and a little smirk. Tease. Then Blur. Then Bill. That is the pattern. The tease is the joke with a sting. Where's your husband and kids? Oh. Right. The blur is the smile that erases intent. We are only teasing. You know we love you. The bill is the message that lands before sunset. Can you help just this once? I used to fall for the rhythm. Laugh. So they would relax. Nod. So they would feel generous. Pay. So the room stayed warm. And every time I paid, the story rewrote itself. I was not a daughter. I was a wallet with legs. So I named it out loud. Tease. Blur. Aspill. Naming turns fog into a map. Once I had the map, I could see the exits. One exit looked like a small X beside a transfer. That was the one I took. The guilt showed up right on schedule. A little knot behind my ribs. You are overreacting. They need you. Be a good daughter. I let it talk. Then I let it pass. Good daughters pay attention. Not invoices. Good daughters tell the truth about the game on the table. Here is what the game looked like in real time. The tease, my sister's voice pitched, sweet, and sharp. The blur, my mother's laugh like a hand over a flame. The bill, my father's private comment about keeping things steady. None of it sounded like theft. That is how it works. It sounds like family. I turned off app notifications for the night because I wanted my own thoughts louder than the phone. I brewed coffee. I did not plan to drink, and breathed in the bitter smell. I counted the steady things in the room. The hum from the fridge. The plant that kept leaning for light. The stack of envelopes I had not opened, because I already knew what they wanted from me. Those things were honest. Even if they were small. I checked the app again. 2 canceled transfers. No confetti. No clap. Just a line of text that said what I had done. It was enough. I saved screenshots to a folder, called Proof. I felt ridiculous for naming it that. And then I felt strong. Sometimes the simplest label is the truest one. Tease. Blur. Bill. I repeated it like a spellbreaker. The pattern kept trying to run in my head. So I ran a different one. Decide. Document. Detach. Decide without asking permission. Document without apology. Detach without ceremony. Say it again. Decide. Document. Detach. I thought about the fork frozen above my plate. I thought about every time I had swallowed heat and called it patience. Not tonight. Tonight I chose cold. Clean. Methodical. A yes to myself that sounded like 2 cancels and a deadline. 21 days. I was not counting down to a fight. I was counting down to a version of me that did not need anyone to tell her what she owed. Tomorrow, the messages would arrive. I knew that. Tease. Blur. Bill would go into overdrive. You are making a scene. You are breaking our hearts. You are ungrateful. But something in me had already shifted. I did not need permission to stand up. I needed a plan. I closed the app and let the room go quiet again. My hands were steady. My face was cool. I was done explaining why. The only thing left was to show what happens when the pattern meets a boundary. I used to call myself the silent investor. Not in stocks or startups, just in my family. The returns were emotional. They said, "We're so proud of you." When they needed a deposit. "You've always been so responsible." Right before another ask. 8.5 years. $168,000. Mortgage. Medical bills. Car repère. Madison's emergency rent. Every color-coded line item still lived in my files. Stacked neatly under tabs. Mortgage. Medical. Car. Madison. When I flipped through them, the sound felt like counting years instead of pages. I remember the first transfer. My dad said, "It's temporary." My mom said, "You're the only one with a steady job." Madison said, "You're my safety net." Row. Back then, I believed that was a compliment. I thought keeping them afloat was proof of love. That if I just gave enough, eventually they'd see me. But love never showed up, only more requests. I became the background noise of their comfort. Sometimes I picture the house I saved from foreclosure. The same one where my seat at the table is a joke. It smells like coffee and old wood polish. Every frame on the wall tells the same story. Madison in a white pageant dress. Dad shaking hands. Mom in her nurse's uniform. If I'm in the photo, it's only as a shoulder. A half smile cropped at the edge. I never made the center. Reliable people rarely do. That night, I sat in my Pearl District apartment staring at my open fridge. Milk. Mustard. A half-eaten salad. The light inside buzzed faintly and flickered out. Like it was tired too. I leaned against the counter, counting my breath. Trying to remember the last time someone said thank you without a request attached. The air smelled like burnt coffee. The kind that sticks to your throat. My hands itched for my phone to check. To reassure. To send something. Habit is a hard leash to break. But I let it sit. Face down. I opened my budgeting app instead. Half my paycheck every month draining into the same black hole. A digital proof of devotion. I scrolled back year by year until the numbers blurred. I had been financing a version of family that only worked if I stayed small. I once believed giving equaled goodness. That self-sacrifice was maturity. But maturity is not endurance. It's recognition. I looked at the cracked photo frame on my desk. The one I'd meant to replace years ago. The glass was split down the middle, slicing through my reflection. The apology that never showed. I whispered to myself. It sounded like a confession. I used to keep every receipt because I thought proof mattered. But proof doesn't fix the story. It only reminds you how long you lived inside it. Still, I knew what came next. The backlash. The texts. The guilt. The same lines. Different day. This time, I wouldn't bend. I wasn't cutting them off out of anger. I was drawing the line where love ends and obligation begins. Because here's the truth I've learned. Help has an end date. Obligation doesn't. And only one of those is love. That night, I saved every file. Renamed the folder, Boundaries. And backed it up twice. Not for revenge, for memory. So when the guilt tried to rewrite history, I'd have the facts. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the floor. For the first time in years, it was quiet. Not the heavy silence of suppression. A new kind, the sound of not being owned. Tomorrow, I knew, the world would start buzzing again. Notifications. Posts. Demands disguised as worry. But tonight, the balance finally felt even. I wasn't the silent investor anymore. I was the accountant closing the books. The next morning, the silence shattered exactly the way I expected. Ping. 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 My phone buzzed like it was possessed. Mom first, sweet at the edges. Sharp underneath. Honey. Did something happen? The mortgage transfer didn't go through. Then Dad. All command and disappointment. You forgot the payment. Fix it today. Then Madison. Predictable as rain. Hey. Can you Venmo me rent's due? Not a single one asked if I was okay. The chimes kept stacking. Faster. Louder, like a metronome for their dependents. My screen glowed hot against my palm. A pulse of expectation. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Every message was a reminder of how much I'd trained them to expect me on call. By noon, the tone had shifted. The soft guilt gave way to authority. Dads, we depend on you. Moms, you are being cruel. Madison's, I guess family doesn't mean much to you. I put the phone face down. Let it buzz itself hoarse. Later that evening, I made tea and opened social media, something I hadn't done in weeks. And there it was. Mom's post. Shiny and vague. The caption every martyr uses. Some people forget who raised them. Underneath, Madison's heart emoji glowed like a taunt. Dad commented a prayer hands emoji. The internet's way of saying we tried. I read it twice. I didn't cry. I just took a screenshot and filed it in a folder I'd already made. Titled, Context. It's funny how quick they were to turn me into a villain once the money stopped moving. The roles don't change, only the soundtrack does. When you're paying, you're a saint. When you stop, you're selfish. Outside. Rain traced silver streaks down my window, smearing the city lights into a watercolor blur. I watched them melt together, thinking how visibility and clarity are not the same thing. They could see me all these years. They just never looked. That weekend, I drove to Beaverton to return some mail that had been sent to the house. Inside, the air was thick with polish and old coffee. My mother's idea of warmth. The living room walls were lined with frames, the gallery of winds. Madison in a pageant crown. Dad shaking hands with some city official. Mom smiling in her nurse's scrubs. And in a few frames, there, I was half visible. A shoulder. A hand. A laugh caught mid-turn. Cropped out just enough to prove my place. I stood there longer than I meant to. I saw where a pair of scissors had trimmed a duplicate photo years ago, slicing me cleanly out of the background. That was their balance sheet. I was part of the cost. Never the portrait. I took a deep breath, set the envelope on the counter, and walked out without saying goodbye. On the drive home, my phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Madison. You don't have to be so dramatic. I almost laughed. The way people call boundaries drama, just because they prefer the old script. By the time I pulled into my parking spot, the rain had turned into mist. My windshield was streaked. My heart steady. I didn't owe anyone a reply. Let them post. Let them pray. Let them guilt each other into the story they can live with. I had proof. I had silence. And for the first time in years, I had room to breathe. I poured another cup of tea, muted every notification, and whispered to myself. They don't ask. They announce. And I finally stopped listening. That week, I started building what I called my war room. Not Kay's order. Papers spread across my desk in perfect lines. Color-coded tabs, stacked like soldiers. Mortgage. Medical. Car. Madison. The sound of each tab snapping into place felt like a pulse returning to its rhythm. I turned on my computer, opened a blank document, and began assembling my archive. Timestamp overlays recorded every file, every proof of transfer, every note. Years of invisible labor, now given shape. Somewhere in the process, I stopped shaking. When you start documenting, the fog lifts. Guilt only thrives in the dark. I spoke out loud as I worked, naming what was really happening. This is not family, I said. This is an invoice with emotions attached. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. The first folder I labeled proof. The second evidence. And the third, ironically, peace. Because that's what this was about. Peace isn't silence. It's accuracy. As I organized, the memories folded in between the files. The mechanic's bill from the time Dad's car broke down. And he said, "You've always been the reliable one." The pharmacy slip for Mom's pills, followed by her text, "You're a blessing." The tuition receipt from Madison's semester in L.A. attached to a selfie, captioned, "Number, independent woman." That was the pattern every thank you came, with a bill attached. But that night, something clicked. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. This was where Module 2 lived. Even if I didn't have a name for it back then, the invisible chain of the survivor. How guilt becomes obedience training. How endurance disguises itself as love. I whispered the truth into the stillness. They taught me that survival meant silence. That endurance was loyalty. But all it really was permission. The next morning, I called Rachel Tran lawyer. Calm voice. No fluff. I told her everything, down to the forged signature and the years of transactions. She listened like an investigator, not a friend. Good? That's what I needed. She said. Send me the files. I said. There are a lot. She smiled through the phone. Perfect. We spent hours drafting the notice. Every sentence balanced between kindness and consequence. Remove Rowena Carter from all financial accounts. Acknowledge debt. Initiate repayment within 21 days. Or, legal proceedings will begin. I stared at the screen when she sent the final version. It was so clean. No anger. No apology. Just truth, with a signature line. She asked, "Do you want to add anything personal?" I shook my head. No. The numbers speak better than I do. When I hung up, I sat back and watched the digital calendar update itself. A new widget appeared on my desktop, D21. A countdown. Small and patient. Like a clock in a courtroom. I didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time, I wasn't waiting for their response. I was waiting for mine. I looked around my apartment papers stacked neatly. Coffee cold. Sunlight soft across the floor. And I realized peace wasn't a gift. It was paperwork with a deadline. The first ping came 3 days later. The subject line read, "Verification required home equity line of credit." I almost ignored it. Then I saw my name. On the attached document. My name. My address. My signature. Except it wasn't my handwriting. My chest went tight. But my pulse didn't race. It steadied. I opened the PDF. A $94,000 line of credit. Approved last spring. Tied to the Beaverton house. My father's signature sat right beside mine. There was another one. A store account. $18,000. The date matched Mom's medical emergency month. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. They didn't just spend my money. I said quietly. They borrowed my name. I sent everything to Rachel. 10 minutes later, she called. Her tone had shifted from patient to precise. Rowena. This isn't debt. It's identity fraud. I didn't answer right away. The word fraud hovered like smoke. For years. I'd wondered what line they'd have to cross before I stopped calling it family. Now I had it in black ink. Not metaphor, Rachel said. We'll handle this. Stay calm, I said. I already am. That night, I sat in front of my computer and opened my bank folders again. Receipts glowed under the monitor light, like evidence in a trial. One folder caught my eye. Madison Projects. I clicked. Inside was a file I hadn't opened in years, a presentation deck she'd asked me to format. My old credit report screenshot sat right there in the corner of one slide. Cropped. Redacted. But mine. I checked the metadata. Created on the family computer. Exported from my user account. She'd used it to pitch her influencer loft deal in downtown Portland. The screenshots were meant to show she had a solid financial sponsor. I didn't know whether to laugh or exhale. There it was. The digital breadcrumb trail I never thought I'd need. My sister's version of love brand partnerships and borrowed credit. And as I stared at the timestamp on that file, the thought landed clean and heavy. This house never had wiring. I was the generator. That was the truth. Every light in their life ran on my current. And now that I'd pulled the plug, everything flickered. I saved all the files into a single PDF labeled Case 01. I sent it to Rachel with no note. Just the subject line, confirmed. The next morning, she replied. Got it. We'll proceed. For the first time in years, I felt something close to calm. Not relief exactly, but structure. Proof replaces panic. I closed my laptop and rested my hand on the folder stacked beside it. All those color-coded tabs: mortgage, medical, car. Madison looked less like history now and more like ammunition. Outside, the rain had started again. Soft against the window. Every drop sounded like a verdict landing. I took a deep breath. Whispered to myself, it's not revenge. It's repair. Then I turned off the light. And the hum of the city replaced the noise of my past. I drove back to Beaverton on a Sunday afternoon. The same day of the week I'd spent a decade pretending was family time. This time there was no wine in my hand. No peace offering in my bag. Just the folder tabs sharp. Paper edges, like Kiat blades. The house looked the same. The porch light still flickered. The siding needed paint. It felt smaller now. As if the truth had already hollowed it out. Inside, Mom was setting the table. Her movements clipped. Dad sat at the head like a judge. Madison scrolled on her phone, pretending to be bored. No one said hello. Mom finally broke the silence. We can't live like this. Rowena. The mortgage. The bills. You know how hard it is for us. I hung my coat on the chair and met her eyes. I know. I've known for years. Dad's voice came sharp. Don't start. This family depends on you. And you've always helped. Why stop now? Because it's not help if it's expected. I said. That's not generosity. That's obligation. Mom dropped the napkin she'd been folding. You're being cruel. No. I said. Calm as ice. I'm being honest. Madison snorted without looking up. Wow. Someone found her backbone. Congratulations. Sis. I turned toward her. You know what's funny? You mock me for not having a husband or kids. But you've lived off me like I'm your second parent. Her head snapped up. Excuse me. Mom jumped in. Flustered. Enough. Both of you. But I wasn't done. You never expected her to be responsible. You just expected me to clean up whatever she broke? Dad slammed his hand on the table. The sound sharp as glass. Watch your tone. We're your parents. Show some respect. I looked at him steadily. Respect is earned. Not demanded. For a second. No one moved. Even the air held its breath. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. The thud on the table snapped everyone into stillness. What's that? Dad demanded. Records. I said evenly. Every payment I've made for this family since I started working. $168,000, over 8.5 years. Mortgage. Credit cards. Et repères. Tuition, even the couch you're sitting on. Madison rolled her eyes. So what? You're keeping score now. No. I said. Flipping the tab so they could see. I'm keeping proof. Mom's voice shook. Rowena. That's not necessary. It is. I said. Because what happened after that dinner wasn't just cruel. It was criminal. Dad frowned. What are you talking about? I slid a printed copy of the HELOC statement across the table. His signature stared back at him right beside mine. His face drained of color. That's ridiculous. Really? The bank disagrees. I pulled out the second page. Stamped with the bank's official seal. Forgery. Identity theft. Elder fraud. Depending on how far we want to go. Madison blinked. You called the bank? I didn't just call. I said. I hired a lawyer. Rachel Tran. She's handling the case. Mom's hand flew to her chest. You brought in an outsider against your own family. You stopped being my family. I said quietly. When you used me like a wallet. Dad leaned forward. Voice low and dangerous. You think you can threaten us? Not a threat. I said. A timeline. I slid one last paper forward. You have 21 days to remove my name from every account and repay what you owe. If you don't. Rachel files. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Mom started to cry. Practice tears that used to break me. Sweetheart. We only did it to protect the house. You know how your father's been struggling? You didn't think. I said. You counted on me to clean it up again. Dad's face hardened. We're your parents. And I was your insurance policy. I said. Not anymore. Madison's voice cracked. You're ruining us. I gathered the folder. Slid it back into my bag. No. Madison. I'm saving myself. As I turned toward the door, Mom's voice followed. Thin and desperate. Please. We can fix this together. I stopped at the doorway. I spent years fixing things you broke. This time, you'll fix it yourselves. Outside, the air was sharp and cold. The sky hung low, gray and heavy. Through the window, I could still see them, Mom crying, Dad pacing, Madison staring blankly. For once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. 2 weeks later, Rachel called. The investigation's complete, she said. The bank confirmed the forgery. Your name's cleared. You're no longer liable for any of their debt. I couldn't speak for a moment. Years of pressure dissolved in one breath. So, I said finally, it's really over. Legally. Yes, she said gently. Emotionally. That's up to you. When I hung up, I stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer over the river. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was quiet, inevitability. When the generator shuts off, I whispered. The house doesn't fall. It was never wired, right? The Beaverton listing went up 3 days later. The caption read, Family home. Needs TLC. For once, that wasn't my job. A week later, an email landed in my inbox. Subject line, one last dinner before we leave the house. Please come. Mom. Short. No apology. No warmth. Just obligation, dressed as invitation. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it. Another part, the one that still wanted clean endings, hesitated. Closure isn't a gift you're given. It's a door you walk through. So I went. The house looked smaller. Stripped bare. Boxes stacked along the wall. Picture frames, wrapped in paper. The smell of roast was gone. Replaced by dust, and something metallic, like a place that had stopped pretending to be alive. Dad looked older. His shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen. Madison sat quietly at the table. Phone, face down. A miracle in itself. Mom's eyes were red. Her hands restless. We ate without small talk. Without pretending. No one thanked me for coming. I didn't expect them to. When the plates were half empty, I spoke. I'm not here to fight. I said. I just wanted to say this face to face. They looked up. Wary. I'm not cutting you out of my life. I continued. But I am cutting the cord that kept me small. If you fall, you get back up on your own. No one argued. No one tried to guilt me. Even Madison stayed quiet. Her eyes glistening with something that looked almost like understanding. The silence that followed didn't hurt. It settled. Soft and clean. For the first time, it wasn't a weapon. It was peace. I helped clear the table. Folded the napkin I'd used. And walked to the doorway. On the wall, the spaces where the family photos had hung were pale squares against darker paint. Empty outlines of what used to be. Those blank spaces looked honest. They were proof that you can remove something toxic and still have a wall that stands. Outside, the sky was bruised gray. The air sharp. I walked slowly down the steps. The gravel crunching beneath my shoes. Each sound small but final. In the weeks after, I focused on the kind of numbers that actually meant something. Savings goals. Tuition for a night course. An email congratulating me on a promotion I'd earned months ago but never celebrated. Every click. Every login. Every tiny act of care for myself felt like laying bricks for a life I finally owned. Sometimes I think back to that brunch, the fork in midair. The laughter. The burn. But the memory doesn't sting anymore. It's just data now. Input that taught me the shape of my limits. I learned something simple. Real love doesn't drain you. It doesn't demand receipts or proof of devotion. It doesn't make you smaller to feel bigger. Now, when I open my window and watch the lights of Portland blink against the water, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Stillness. Help can be kind. Peace is kinder. If you've ever been the one holding everyone else together while they tore you apart. I want to hear your story. Share one boundary sentence